Sam and OpenAI were constantly pushing Microsoft to build out and spend more money and get more capacity. And they're like, you're hamstringing us, man. Like, we can't do this stuff we're supposed to be doing because you're slowing us down. We need to go faster. You want to go slower. We want to go faster. The future is now. We need to get going, and you are in the way, type of deal. Welcome to Venture Step Podcast, where we discuss entrepreneurship, industry trends, and the occasional book review. I'm your host, Dalton Anderson. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the fracturing of OpenAI and Microsoft's relationship. Originally, Microsoft and OpenAI had a great partnership going all the way back to 2019, and Satya had a great relationship with Sam in the 2000s, mid-2000s, 2015 to 2014. They had email correspondence between each other talking about the future of computing and its whole 9 yards. But that's changed. The environment's changed. The relationship has changed, and there is new beginnings. And the reason I wanted to talk about this was because Microsoft recently released their own family of models competing directly with one of their key partners, OpenAI. Microsoft's models, their family of models, is referred to as MAI, otherwise Microsoft AI. And they've got some cool models, which I'll break down in another episode. I really enjoyed their voice model. One thing I did not enjoy was the difficulty it took for me to prove that I wasn't AI. When you try to log in and use the models, you've got to state that you're not AI by clicking this button. And when you hold and click the button, it just doesn't work. And it took me about 4 attempts with me trying on each iteration or each session a couple times and it failing and saying, please try again. You did not pass the test. And I was like, oh, no, they've got my secret. They know me. They know that I'm AI. But anyways, when I tried the models, I enjoyed them. They're pretty cool. So I'll be talking about that. And then in this episode, we're going to break down the relationship. So I'm going to share my screen and do it successfully. The last couple episodes, I've missed the mark on that one, but I'll try my best to do it correctly. So in this episode, we're going to be walking through a PowerPoint. A presentation. There's just too much information and dates that I didn't really feel comfortable memorizing and or reiterating. And so I just think it's better for me to have the foundational understanding of the information and then flash information on the screen. So the first part is the relationship. Microsoft needed OpenAI. OpenAI needed compute. OpenAI could have partnered with anybody. Google was doing their own thing. Google was heavily invested into Anthropic. Amazon was heavily invested into Anthropic. Then combined, Anthropic is owned 20% each from Google and Microsoft, not Microsoft, Google and Amazon. Google's recent investment with their data centers brings their estimated equity to 20%. And then I know that Amazon is a premier partner of Anthropic. So they're in a good spot. Anthropic's winning, and majority of their models are trained on Google's DPUs. So Google's winning too. That's a little different scenario for OpenAI. So OpenAI had competition from Anthropic and other key players like Google, but also they didn't have the compute. And to get compute, it takes a long time. You've got to do the energy, you've got to build it, you've got to get approvals. It takes a long time to build all that stuff. And there's a lack of talent and a huge demand. So you needed to solve the problem now. And so when you look around the room and you think, okay, could this person help me? No, they're not interested. Could this person help me? Okay, no. Could they legitimately help me? Yes, but are they going to? No. So that really leaves you with a singular option. It was still a uncharted territory for the most part. There was potential in AI, but I don't think people were willing to take a huge, massive bet. And so it was like, oh, like you need compute, like you don't really need that much or whatever it may be. And the issue was like there wasn't a economical reason to give away compute to OpenAI if there wasn't a path to monetization. And these other hyperscalers already had key investments and capacity commitments to Anthropic. And so they weren't necessarily interested, and they have their own AI shops as well. Google has, or it has been for a long time until recently, the monopoly on AI researcher talent with Google DeepMind, which was an acquisition. But that being said, OpenAI didn't have that many options, and nor did Microsoft. So I don't necessarily know if this was a partnership that was going to stay for the long term. But regardless, it did happen. So there was a trade of offerings in the system. Microsoft got exclusive rights to service their models, OpenAI's models on their cloud. And then OpenAI got commitments for capacity. This also included a 20% revenue share on the money made on servicing these models funded back to OpenAI. So there was profit sharing involved. And then in the mid 2026, there was a renegotiation, especially with some of the stuff that OpenAI has been doing. Codex has been around for a long time, but that's like a direct competitor to Microsoft's Copilot. In some senses, it is. In some senses, not. I mean, Copilot does a lot more than just coding, but it is really good at coding. That was the main use case. And that's a direct threat to Microsoft's offering. And people aren't really using Copilot as much as they are Claude Code or Codex. I haven't heard anybody use anti-gravity besides myself and one other person, but I like anti-gravity quite a bit. Anyways, regardless, there is this overstep from OpenAI looking to get funding for infrastructure and to building out these data centers to train. And then from there, Microsoft wasn't necessarily super thrilled with the growth speed of which OpenAI wanted them to invest in these data centers, because Microsoft felt that they would be holding the bag at the end of the day. Like they're the ones that have to own the data centers. OpenAI could technically change the contract and then get compute from someone else, and maybe Microsoft doesn't need this much compute. So they were very pessimistic about the idea of spending a lot of capital on data centers, given that it's not necessarily super proven and it's okay to lease and or let leases go, simply because if everybody's building data centers, it's going to bring the cost of compute down. And so then it becomes a buyer's market instead of a seller's market. At least that's the thesis. We'll see how that plays out. Okay, the timeline. This is kind of important. So in 2019, there was an initial investment for $1,000. $1,000. That's crazy. I said that. For $1 billion. It's $1,000 to Microsoft. $1 billion investment for exclusive cloud partner provider rights, and then to utilize the compute available within Microsoft's platform. Then there was an extension in 2023. They provided another investment of $10 billion, cumulatively reaching a $13 billion investment total. And then there was a lot of pushback with this 2019 investment. Bill Gates came out publicly and said that this is a waste of money for Microsoft to be spending $1 billion on an unproven AI research lab. And it wound up being a really good investment. The public disclosure from the trial with Elon Musk and Sam Altman stated that they had made quite a bit of money. And it's in the next couple of slides, it will talk about it. But anyways, after that, in November 2023, there was that whole thing that happened where the board fired Sam. Altman. There's a whole bunch of weird stuff happening in that time. There was the whistleblower that randomly just offed himself and the crime scene looked really weird. There was the people coming out saying that Sam was abusive. His own family members was saying crazy stuff about him. This is all allegedly, by the way. This is allegedly. After that, there was alleged statements that he'd been lying to the board and that he's distrustful. And then there was Elon Musk being super upset with the relationship with OpenAI and him starting his own lab, XAI, to compete against OpenAI because OpenAI didn't have any like real open source models and everything was closed. And so it didn't necessarily align with the thought process of being open and being open AI. And then the real push from the board to kick him out. And eventually they fired Sam. And then Microsoft had this emergency plan put together to where they were going to spend something buku money, like $50 billion to keep all the AI talent. They were going to stand up a new organization, hire Sam again, and hire the 900 engineers that said that they were going to leave if Sam was fired. And that pushed the board to reinstate Sam as the CEO. And then they changed the board of directors around. And then it went from more of a nonprofit lens to more for profit, which was the statement I was going to say earlier. Was the other thing that's a bit odd about this whole situation is OpenAI going from a nonprofit to this like for-profit organization, but utilizing all of the monies and technology that was provided for investment wise to create a for-profit entity when it was created for non-profit reasons. That's an odd one. I don't know what's going to happen if that's allowed. Like the precedent of taking research funds and information and grants and then turning that around to be for-profit seems to be a bad precedent. And maybe there's a fork of the organization and then the nonprofit is able to provide certain models for free, open source or something. I'm not sure what the real solution is supposed to be there, but it is a pickle for sure. Okay, so then after that, there was this like hire from Google DeepMind. Microsoft hired somebody to work for them, Suleiman, which he's had internal issues and employee complaints. So he was a risky hire for Microsoft, but they needed the talent and he was very talented and was someone from a very, very well-respected AI research organization, Google DeepMind. And he was the co-founder of DeepMind. So it makes sense. I wonder what that pay package looks like. And then in 2025, there was this restructuring. OpenAI really wanted to grow much faster and they needed more capacity, although Microsoft had exclusive capacity rights to provide. And then there was a lot of complaints. And so that they agreed to do a restructure and allow them to get away from the exclusive hosting. But the way that they went about it, they were already negotiating on the side this Stargate $500 billion investment with Oracle. Yeah, Oracle and SoftBank. There we go. Oracle and SoftBank. And then there was an additional investment from SoftBank for around $40 billion, which led to additional investments into infrastructure. And then they terminated their exclusivity clause and they changed the structure of the contract. And then recently, as of this month, Microsoft launched its own models. So from the Google DeepMind hire in 2024, now in 2026, they have a Google DeepMind like hire that was working for a couple of years. And now we're at the point to where we have models from Microsoft. So as I mentioned earlier, there was a great synergy, and I called out that I don't necessarily know if this was a permanent partnership in OpenAI's eyes. They didn't necessarily have a big table to look around at. Like once you start thinking about consistent year over year billions of dollars in investment in infrastructure, resources, and distribution, there isn't many options. There's a couple. And majority of those were tied up with Anthropic. So there really wasn't an option for OpenAI to look elsewhere. And they had an early rapport. Sam and Satya were friends prior. They had email correspondence in 2015. And I did mention earlier, hey, Bill was like ringing the alarms. Like, we should never do this. This is crazy. What a waste of money. And it wound up being a really good forecasted return. And during the federal trials, they revealed that they projected a $92 billion return on their investment. That's crazy. I don't know. It's just unfathomable amount of money. Yeah. And the whole idea was, hey, the AI race starts today. We're in it. We've got the best talent that we have basically purchased for exclusive rights for. Okay, so the next part was this board crisis, which was a huge deal. So Sam was ousted as the board member in 2023. And this exposed a key truth for Microsoft. And from Microsoft's perspective, you got to think about how critical OpenAI's exclusivity, stability is to Microsoft. It's one of their key offerings from a market perspective to a customer perspective. When you think about the marketplace and what they've said for the investor market, it's like, hey, we have exclusive rights to the best models on the market. That's why we are winning. And we will continue to win because we're years ahead. No one can catch up to us right now. That was the vibe. But the problem is they didn't necessarily have control over OpenAI. And so when they had fired Sam, Microsoft had no idea. They found out as it happened, which is a huge deal when you're thinking about a critical partner that you've invested billions of dollars with. You have had a multi-year relationship. They're critical to the servicing of your clients and the competitiveness of your stock price. So for something like that to happen, and for you to have to deal with the aftermath and not know about it prior, it's a problem. And that's what Microsoft recognized. Microsoft recognized that this is huge. This is a problem. So then they start their own process. And I was wrong. So I think I quoted 40 billion, but they said it was going to cost 25 billion to rescue the engineers that were going to resign as a result of Sam getting fired and hiring Sam, which is not ideal. I mean, randomly forking out 25 billion is obviously not in the budget. I mean, I'm sure Microsoft can make it work, but not ideal at all. And then after that point, they restructured the board, and Microsoft pushed back pretty hard on a lot of the board members that they were trying to appoint. And you could see that there's some friction there. They were trying to appoint ex-CEO of Google Cloud, which is crazy. And then they were trying to appoint some other person who ran a competitive cloud offering. And Microsoft's like, hey, like, we are your exclusive cloud offering. Why are you trying to put other people on the board that are direct competitors, both on an AI space and as a cloud provider? What's going on here? We don't like this. And so eventually they settled on a in between, someone from the Bill Gates Foundation. So after realizing that it's a massive problem that they don't have control over OpenAI and they never will, they start moving towards their own in-house shop. So they move towards hiring a DeepMind co-founder. Then they started creating their own models. They have access to OpenAI's technology. until 2032. And so they have access to technology. They can build it, and then they can reverse engineer some of the stuff that was done from OpenAI and just leapfrog ahead of time and spend less time figuring things out and then more time doing stuff. And so the AI thinking models were, pretty impressive, I think, from a first go at it. When you think about the first model that Google came out with, Google's model, Bard, was pretty rough. It made some mistakes live on a demo. Google lost billions of dollars in market cap that day. You think about Anthropic's first model or OpenAI's first model. The things have changed because, hey, we're a little bit further along here, but still calling out that the first model that Microsoft put out is interesting. It uses the typical, mixture of experts. I like their voice model. It's got a lot of range. It's very interesting, and you can feel the emotions in the voice, which is hard to mimic. I think it's probably hard to mimic sad or determined or disappointed. There's just this thing that you've got to do those things. Like your face needs to change. Your lips are a little tighter in certain scenarios. When you're angry, your chest tightens up. When you're sad, you feel a little bit more empty. And it's able to do that. Some of the characters are better than others, but in a general sense, you can get the vibe. All right. So this was the thing I talked about was Sam and OpenAI were constantly pushing Microsoft to build out and spend more money and get more capacity. And they're like, you're hamstringing us, man. Like we can't do the stuff we're supposed to be doing because you're slowing us down. We need to go faster. You want to go slower. We want to go faster. The future is now. We need to get going, and you are in the way, type of deal. Microsoft had a cautionary approach to CapEx spend towards data centers, given that the marketplace was uncertain and they don't know how it's all going to play out with everybody building all these massive data centers. Microsoft is building data centers, but the scale that OpenAI wanted to build the data centers, I mean, they're talking about a $500 billion data center with multiple nuclear power plants and just levels of insanity that probably drove Microsoft nuts. And we're like, listen, guys, we're not doing this at all. We're not signing up for that. We'll build data centers. We'll be constantly growing due to customer demands and what we think the future compute's going to be. But we're not going to build some insanity because you want us to, which I think is fair. And so that was one of the ruptures of the relationship, was this infrastructure loss of exclusivity as a cloud partner with Microsoft for training compute. So there's this alternate push for compute, and then they eventually agree, but then they completely cut Microsoft out of the deal and went with this Stargate project, which was SoftBank and Oracle, which would rub me the wrong way. Like, we're supposed to be key partners here. What's going on? So the next step is the renegotiation. The renegotiation was interesting. So originally, as I said, they had exclusive rights to the model. And then OpenAI, now this restructure, it's non-exclusive. They're free to deploy to AWS, Google, and Oracle. Prior, they had this AGI clause, rights to revert and terminate if the nonprofit board determines AGI is achieved. The AGI clause has been removed, non-exclusive IP licensing rights guaranteed until 2032. And that's where I was getting at, is they have exclusive rights, or these like exclusive rights to the IP where they can see all the technology and look at the innards of the tech to help reverse engineer some of the stuff that they're doing at their Microsoft AI lab. Prior, I mentioned how the deal had Microsoft paying OpenAI for OpenAI revenue because there was exclusivity. Now Microsoft pays zero, and then OpenAI pays a capped $38 billion royalty to Microsoft through 2030. I'm not necessarily sure on the full understanding of the royalty fee, but like I think it's interesting you went from getting paid to paying. But the prior licensing agreement was exclusive distribution of OpenAI models, and then now it's non-exclusive, and then Copilot loses its unique privilege moat access to OpenAI. But now there's just this head-to-head rivalry that I'd mentioned earlier in the episode, to where there was the fracturing of the relationship over time. And the biggest thing was the loss of control, or not really the loss of control, they're just never having control in the first place. And OpenAI not keying in and including Microsoft on their decision to fire Sam. Then the whirlwind of that, OpenAI noticing that Microsoft is starting their own lab after that. So from OpenAI's perspective, it's like, okay, you're starting your own lab. Like, what's going on here? From Microsoft's perspective, it's, hey, we don't have control of this key differentiating investment that we've made over these years. We can't have that. We're too big of a company to be relying on a startup. So from there, they start going down their own paths after that. OpenAI is frustrated with the lack of compute. And so they're pushing to change the contract and do this negotiation of the Stargate, which they do. And Microsoft agrees because they weren't going to commit to something like that. And then there was the other part of the problem with OpenAI servicing their clients prior with Codex. So Codex was a direct competitor of Microsoft's Copilot, which is odd. You're competing with your best friend, and not in a friendly way. So they're one-to-one products to where you can switch out the other, and then you'd be able to do something functionally the same. Copilot, I think, always has a bad rap. I'm not sure how the model is optimized, but if you use OpenAI's model for coding and then use Copilot's model for coding, I feel like OpenAI's model is better, even though they potentially are the same model, which confuses me. I don't necessarily understand the black magicry behind the scenes that's happening. I'm not sure, but I do know that they're not as good for some reason. Hopefully that changes over time, but now there's this head-to-head rivalry on compute and models. It's interesting. So now Microsoft is now in the race, which is different. They have exclusive rights to the technology where they have access until 2032. When I say exclusive rights, what I mean is like they can look under the hood, the IP. And so now that they're in the race, this is going to be even more interesting because now Microsoft has AI, OpenAI has their own thing, Anthropic has their own thing, Google has their own thing. AWS is their own thing that they're building out, but their first models are really towards customers and making the most out of Amazon and Alexa and their devices. But I'm sure that they have other models that they plan on coming out with. Overall, I think it's going to be an interesting environment and good. I always say that competition is for the best for us customers. And I hope that this pushes us to the next level. It doesn't hurt to have another runner in the race as long as everybody's running fairly. Of course, wherever you are in this world, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Thanks for listening in, and listen in next week. Goodbye.